Linda, the brave single. Mom. Linda Jackson was not born a fighter, but life in a small Texan town quickly taught her to become one. At 33, with warm brown eyes and a stubborn streak, she found herself standing alone after a tumultuous marriage. Her ex-husband, Brian, was once the pillar of her world, but after years of quiet resentment and misunderstanding, their lives fractured beyond repair. It was a storm neither of them handled well, but Linda was determined not to let the wreckage define her, or her son, Evan, who was only 6 the day his parents parted. With the ink of the divorce papers barely dry, Linda faced a new mountain, fighting for custody of Evan. In the beginning, she thought it would be straightforward. After all, she was the one who dried Evan's tears when he was scared of thunder, who stitched his costumes for school plays, who cheered at soccer games from the front row. But in the shadows loomed her former in-laws, unwilling to let go of the family's only grandson. Life as a single mother wasn't just new, it was utterly disorienting. Linda lost sleep over bills and budgeted every grocery trip, but her greatest worry was the battle she'd have to wage in court. For Evan, she had to be both anchor and sail, gentle enough to soothe, tough enough to steer through storms. She became a master at hiding her anxiety behind bedtime stories and sunny smiles, even when she felt anything but brave. In private, Linda questioned every decision. Was she strong enough? Was she doing the right thing by pushing back? Yet, with every small victory, a giggle from Evan before bedtime, a handwritten note saying, "I love you, Mom," her courage crystallized. She realized she didn't need to roar to be brave. Sometimes, real bravery meant showing up each day, steady as a lighthouse, no matter how relentless the waves. The shadow cast by the old family. Linda thought the hardest part of her divorce was behind her, but she quickly discovered that the true battle was just beginning. After the official split, Brian's family seemed bizarrely determined to keep a grip on her life, and especially on Evan's. The air became heavy with suspicion and unspoken accusations whenever she picked Evan up from their house. Mrs. Harris, Brian's mother, once so polite during holidays, now greeted Linda with eyes sharp as glass. Every interaction turned into a subtle contest of words, a balancing act of diplomacy, polluted by animosity. It wasn't just awkwardness, it was resistance in every sense. The Harris family began to meddle in ways that left Linda exhausted. They'd show up unannounced at Evan's school events and try to make her feel like an outsider at her own son's soccer matches. Sometimes, she would overhear them, talking in hushed tones to teachers or other parents, their stories echoing half-truths about her supposed instability or lack of commitment as a mother. Linda's hands would grip the steering wheel the tighter on the drive home, her mind racing with frustration. The deeper problem emerged when the Harris family started fueling the legal battle. They hired aggressive lawyers, questioned each of Linda's parenting decisions, and pushed Brian to fight for sole custody, even though he rarely made much effort with Evan before. Everywhere Linda turned, she met a new roadblock or rumor, something designed to cast doubt on her capability. They even tried to get social services involved more than once, reporting minor slip-ups as if they were signs of unfitness. For Linda, it felt like living in the penumbra of a storm, never knowing when the next bolt of trouble would strike. The fear wasn't just for herself, but for the climate Evan was forced to grow up in, always hearing whispers, always sensing the tension between the adults he loved. The Harris shadow threatened to rob both mother and son of their hard-won peace. But Linda, wounded yet unbroken, pressed on, fueling her determination from the very darkness the Harris family cast upon her world. Secret evidence gathering. Linda knew that navigating the legal labyrinth of the custody battle would require more than heartfelt testaments or tearful pleas. The opposition was calculating, relentless, and relished the power they held over her. So Linda became as tactical as she was brave. She started small, careful not to arouse suspicion. Her smartphone became her silent ally. Whenever conversations with Wayne, her ex-husband, turned sharp or subtle threats crept into messages from his mother, Linda quietly hit record. She cataloged her digital life, screenshotting every accusatory text and every misleading message the Myers sent, time-stamped and carefully labeled in cloud folders, named with innocuous titles. Late at night, after Jacob was asleep and the apartment was still, Linda would review the collection. She kept a spiral-bound notebook stashed behind cereal boxes in the kitchen. Here, in precise cursive, she documented every unsettling incident. The day Wayne showed up unannounced and refused to leave until Jacob burst into tears. The strange calls to Jacob's school secretary inquiring about Linda's work schedule. The inexplicable visits from Child Protective Services prompted by anonymous tips. Dates, times, the smallest detail. Nothing was left to memory alone. Linda understood the high stakes. She read late into the night about family law, legal precedents, and admissible evidence. She watched court hearings online, learning the difference between hearsay and hard proof, understanding that sympathy alone would never outmaneuver the calculated force of her opponents. She upgraded her phone, storing data in encrypted files, ensuring that even if her emails were monitored or her devices accessed, nothing would be easily found. Her resilience never faltered, even on the toughest days. Sometimes she'd break down, exhausted by the burden of secrecy, the weight of always being on alert. She'd look at sleeping Jacob and quietly promise him that his future was worth every ounce of caution she put into her quest for justice. The Myers family's tactics grew bolder as the court date approached. Anonymous complaints to child services, surprise visits from nosy neighbors, and carefully worded emails to school administrators. All were documented. Linda reached out to trusted friends, asking them to serve as witnesses when encounters became heated. She collected statements, signed and notarized, from teachers who had seen nothing but warmth and stability between her and Jacob. She began to wear a discreet voice recorder on a chain beneath her blouse, just in case. Throughout it all, Linda's outward demeanor remained calm. At school events and PTA meetings, she smiled, greeted her adversaries with polite nods, all the while noting the sideways glances and whispered conversations. Her inner resolve grew sharper. The injustice she faced only fueled the meticulousness with which she gathered her arsenal of truth. By the time her court date finally arrived, Linda had assembled a portfolio that rivaled anything the Myers lawyers could produce. Hundreds of digital files, audio recordings where threats slid just beneath the surface of polite conversation, text message threads revealing attempts to manipulate or intimidate her, written accounts of every unfounded accusation. There were pages of notes, photographs of Jacob's bruised feelings after a tense day, and testimony from local community members who had seen how fiercely Linda loved her son. In the sleepless final week, Linda went over her folders again and again, practicing what she would say, a measured, honest account, just the facts, letting the evidence stand on its own. She knew the courtroom could be cold and unforgiving, but she'd learned to expect nothing less from her adversaries. As a final touch, she prepared a letter in Jacob's own handwriting, a note he'd tucked under her pillow one rainy evening that simply read, "Thank you for always being there, Mom." It wasn't legal evidence, but Linda wanted the judge to see a child's quiet plea for stability and truth. When she walked into court, portfolio in hand, she felt the air crackle. Lawyers straightened, the Myers family glared, and Linda steeled herself. The truth, she knew, didn't need embellishment. She was ready, armored in quiet facts, and the unwavering love of a mother, willing to gather every piece of truth to protect her son. The battle of wits in court, the day of the trial, dawned gray and windblown, a fitting mirror for Linda's mood as she stood outside the courthouse, clutching her binder of evidence like a life preserver. Travis's lawyer was widely known in the county for his theatrics. The Harrisons, dressed in sharp suits, filled the courtroom's front row with expressions carved from stone. Linda, representing herself, wore a simple navy dress she'd borrowed for the occasion and the most determined look she owned. The hearing began with the expected rehearsed speeches from Travis's side. They painted Linda as overworked and unstable, leaning on gossip circulated by the Harrisons, late-night calls, missed school events, always for work, never for pleasure, and isolated incidents stretched into patterns of supposed neglect. Mrs. Harrison, unflinching on the witness stand, recounted instances of concern for Dylan's well-being, her voice wobbling at all the right moments. Linda sat silent, hands clasped in her lap, refusing to interrupt or betray the rolling thunder inside her. She waited. When her chance came, she walked to the stand with slow, deliberate steps. The judge, a woman with tough eyes and a reputation for disliking drama, watched her closely. Linda began not with appeals to sympathy, but with facts. She produced printouts of her meticulously logged notes, dates and times she'd cared for Dylan while balancing work, names of teachers and coaches who vouched for her. She played carefully clipped audio showing the Harrisons discussing ways to undermine her parenting. Nothing inflammatory, just quiet plotting couched as concern. She handed over a file of text messages, each presented in order, that contradicted the Harrisons' testimony. For every claim, Linda calmly produced a witness, a log, or a piece of digital truth. At several points, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted palpably. The Harrisons' lawyer tried to object, but the evidence lined up too well. Mrs. Harrison faltered when faced with her own words, recorded and played back, contradicting her statements of support and concern. Teachers, and even a neighbor, took the stand to describe Linda's attentive, loving care. No sign of neglect or instability in sight. Throughout the cross-examinations, Linda's poise remained unshaken. She never attacked, never raised her voice. Her focus was always on Dylan, on presenting a stable home, a mother's love, and unshakable devotion. If the lawyer tried to provoke her, she responded only with cold, honest detail, leaning on her evidence each time. In a final quiet gesture, she presented a drawing Dylan had made, addressed to the judge, thanking Mommy for reading me stories and making pancakes. By closing arguments, the grand narrative painted by Travis's family unraveled. The judge's line of questioning became sharper with the Harrisons, scrutinizing motives and inconsistencies. Linda ended her part, not with melodrama, but with a simple, resolute statement. "I am not perfect, but I am the safe place my son knows. I will always choose what is best for him." After hours of tense deliberation, Linda waited in the courthouse hallway. She stared at the scuffed tile floor, imagining Dylan at his soccer game that afternoon. blissfully unaware of the drama unfolding. When the judge finally delivered her ruling, there was no theatrical, gasping, just the rustle of legal pads and the lowering of defeated gazes. Linda was awarded primary custody, with specific language admonishing the Harrisons' interference. By the time Linda stepped back out into the parking lot, Binder finally clutched at her side. She felt less like a victor and more like a survivor. She had not outshouted her opponents. She had outlasted them, relying on patience, proof, and the unwavering love that had begun this fight in the first place. The truth revealed. When the dust finally began to settle after the intensity of the courtroom showdown, the air around Linda was thick with anticipation and uncertainty. She'd stepped outside the courtroom for a brief moment, breathing in the crisp fall air, her hands shaking despite her efforts to appear composed. Her mind replayed snippets of the trial, her calm statements, her evidence, the awkward silences that had followed the playback of audio recordings. Each detail lingered, heavy as stones in her memory. The hours that followed were a blur. As the judge retreated to deliberate, Linda sat silently on a hard wooden bench in the courthouse hallway. Other families came and went, their faces painted with relief, anger, or tears. Linda found herself surrounded by people, yet completely alone in her anxiety, her heart pounding with every footstep that echoed down the long hall. While she waited, she dug her nails into her palms and silently recited every fact and truth she'd brought forward, trying to find comfort in the knowledge that she had done everything within her power. Meanwhile, across the corridor, the old family, Brian's side, huddled together for a whispered debrief. She caught glimpses of their tight-lipped glances, the forced encouragement Brian's mother offered him, the subtle calculation in the way their lawyer gestured with stern authority. It occurred to Linda that their confidence seemed to be waning, their voices lower, their glares less certain than before. The courtroom doors, heavy oak and so intimidating in their own right, now represented the threshold between her family's future and the ghosts of the past. Eventually, the bailiff summoned everyone back inside. Linda's legs were mechanical as she walked, her body held upright by force of will. She could sense Evan's eyes in her mind, wide, trusting, expectant, a reminder of what all of this had been for. The courtroom felt chilly as people filed in again. The judge's return bringing immediate, pin-drop silence. The Harris family sat rigidly, their tension palpable. Brian flicked his eyes downward, avoiding Linda entirely. The judge began speaking, her tone measured and steady, revealing that she'd thoroughly reviewed every piece of evidence presented. The truth emerged not in dramatic gasps, but in the subtle unraveling of the false narratives carefully woven by Brian's family. The judge referenced specific text messages, matching them precisely with the times Linda had documented. She recounted segments from the audio evidence, noting the underlying threats and manipulation in the voices of Brian and his mother, carefully peeled from beneath their polite surface. All the unannounced visits, backhanded comments to school officials, and orchestrated complaints to Child Protective Services. Each was now exposed as not simply concern, but a calculated effort to destabilize Linda's world. Linda listened as the judge dismantled, piece by piece, the arguments constructed against her. The judge's words were factual, rooted in the evidence, and free from emotion. Yet to Linda's ears, each declaration felt like a release, a weight unfastening from her shoulders. Every time the judge mentioned a pattern of interference or unsupported allegations, Linda felt a vindicating rush beneath her skin. She had been seen, and more importantly, she had been believed. Brian's lawyer made a last-ditch effort to question the legitimacy of Linda's evidence, but the judge cut the argument short. She explained clearly that covert evidence, when used to prove repeated and sustained misconduct in the interest of the child, had not only revealed the reality of Linda's home life, but had also protected Evan from the ripple effects of a bitter, vindictive custody battle. The court recognized Linda's sacrifices, not just enduring the scrutiny, but documenting her every move, not for personal gain, but for the well-being of her little boy. The turning point came as the judge referred directly to the written testimonies from teachers, neighbors, and friends, each one reinforcing the portrait Linda had so painstakingly built of a stable, nurturing environment for Evan. The contrast to the uncertainty and manipulation introduced by Brian's family was striking. The judge's voice was calm, but left no room for ambiguity. The upheaval in Evan's life was not a result of Linda's supposed instability, but of external meddling and attempts to undermine a loving mother-son bond. As the ruling was read, Linda's senses seemed to sharpen in the hushed room. Evan's custody was granted in her favor, with Brian given visitation under specific, well-defined conditions. However, the most significant outcome wasn't simply the legal language. It was the judge's admonishment of the Harris family's conduct. She left no room for misunderstanding, future interference, manipulation, or attempts to discredit. Linda would not be tolerated by the court. It was a decisive, public rebuke that resonated far beyond the single afternoon in court. The emotional impact of those words settled over Linda like the first gentle snowfall of the season, almost surreal in its quiet, but deeply, irrevocably real. She didn't stand up and cheer. Instead, her shoulders slumped in exhausted relief. Brian's family muttered quietly among themselves, their defeat obvious. Brian, for the first time, looked genuinely lost. His eyes darted up for a moment before landing on the paperwork he now held limply in his hands. With the legal wrangling concluded, Linda collected her portfolio of carefully ordered files, feeling as though each document was now a badge of her perseverance. On the way out, she passed familiar faces, teachers who had testified, the family friend who had waited outside for moral support, the social worker who'd once visited and now offered a quiet, knowing smile. Every glance and gesture acknowledged the transformative moment. Linda had not simply won in the court of law, but in the court of truth. Once outside, beneath the late afternoon sky, Linda called Evan's teacher to thank her. She left a message for her own mom, voice trembling but filled with new hope. It struck her, standing in the courthouse parking lot as the sun began to dip, that justice wasn't always loud or explosive. Sometimes it was a soft, steady voice, unwavering, quietly powerful, and determined to let the truth rise to the surface after so many storms. Over the following days, word of the outcome spread quickly through the town. Whispers of relief crept into the conversations of those who'd watched Linda struggle from afar. The Harris family, though wounded by their loss, faded quietly from Linda's daily life. Where suspicion and accusation had once thrived, now there was only space for healing. Linda was finally able to exhale, sharing joyful reunions and small moments with Evan, walking home from school, baking cookies in their modest kitchen, giggling over the silliest cartoons after dinner. Yet, the long ordeal left Linda changed. She knew the world could be unfair, and that the truth was not always obvious at first glance. But she also knew that dignity and hope, held on to fiercely enough, documented with unwavering patience, could light even the darkest corners of life. As she tucked Evan into bed each night, she felt the cold shadow of doubt replaced by the warm certainty that their family was safe. She'd fought not just for her son, but for the fundamental truth that love, when stubborn and true, could withstand even the harshest of trials. The story of Linda's victory wasn't destined for headlines or bestsellers, but for every parent who ever felt powerless, for every child caught in the crossfire of adult battles, her story became an invisible signal of hope, a reassurance that courage, honesty, and perseverance still had a place in the world. And, quietly, Linda resolved that she would never again let fear or deceit claim space in her home. The truth had its day in court, and this time it was Linda and Evan who walked away, protected, whole, and free to begin again. Justice for Linda and Evan. As autumn sunlight filtered through the window of their modest apartment, Linda sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee gone cool. The epic custody fight was over. There were no more clandestine recordings, no more anxious glances over her shoulder every time the phone rang, and no more hushed, tearful conversations after Evan drifted to sleep. The gavel had fallen, the court's ruling was clear, and for the first time in years, Linda could finally breathe without fear. But what did justice truly look like? For Linda, it was less about the official decree and more about the return of wholeness, something fragile, hard-won, and above all, precious. It was the slow reweaving of an everyday life previously shredded by suspicion, doubt, and intrusion. Every morning brought sunlight that felt cleaner, and every night brought rest that was deeper. Yet, for all the public drama, the most significant parts of their healing played out in quiet spaces, invisible to the world, picking up the pieces. In the days and weeks that followed the verdict, Linda threw herself into the comforting rituals of normalcy. She and Evan baked peanut butter cookies and made popcorn garlands for their spindly living room plant. Dinner was no longer a time to push through tense silences or whispered worries about the future. Instead, laughter returned to the table, and stories, small, silly, and deeply personal, were shared without reservation. Linda found herself noticing the tiny ways her son had changed in the aftermath. The way he clung a bit tighter at bedtime, or how he sometimes watched her face during phone calls, as if searching for some silent clue about their fate. Healing wasn't linear, nor was it guaranteed. Evan's teachers reported gradual improvements in his mood and schoolwork. His drawings began to fill with brighter colors and smiling stick figures again. There were still bad dreams, but less frequent, and comfort came easier each time. Justice, Linda discovered, started with these incremental, nearly invisible victories. The return of childhood to a boy who'd spent too much of his young life navigating adult-sized battles. Navigating a community's response justice had ripple effects. It didn't just transform Linda and Evan's world, but sent waves through their small Texas community. Linda noticed the difference immediately. At the grocery store, the cashier, who once struggled to meet her gaze, now offered a warm smile. Teachers who testified in her favor checked in with encouraging notes in Evan's backpack. The whispers, which had once been suspicious, became sympathetic, supportive, even proud. But with those changes came challenges, too. Brian's family, now publicly rebuked by the court, dulled their efforts, but their presence lingered. They avoided direct confrontations. Yet Linda felt eyes on her at parent-teacher conferences and ball games. Rumors faded, slowly, But not entirely. Some neighbors, loyal to Brian's family for decades, maintained a wary distance. Linda learned to accept that reconciliation with everyone was impossible, and instead celebrated the bonds that had survived the ordeal and the new friendships forged amongst those who had stood by her. The emotional aftermath, though the ruling was decisive, Linda's feelings were more complex than simple relief or triumph. There was exhaustion, yes, the sort that settled deep in her bones after years of vigilance. At night, she sometimes woke in a cold sweat, heart pounding, replaying tense courtroom moments or harsh accusations made against her. In these quiet hours, Linda questioned everything she'd endured. Was the fight for justice worth the toll on her spirit? Would Evan, someday, resent the struggle or understand the magnitude of her love? Yet as days slipped by, those doubts softened. Linda discovered a reservoir of strength she hadn't known existed, a tenacity born not from anger, but from love. She slowly dismantled the fortress she'd built around her heart during the custody war, letting herself feel joy again. Small things brought tears to her eyes. Evan's spontaneous hug at school pickup. The first time he invited a friend over for a sleepover since the trial. His squeal of delight on a Saturday morning unclouded by court dates or fear, redefining family and forgiveness. Justice did not mean returning to the way things were before. Instead, Linda and Evan began to build something new, intentionally, carefully, and with open eyes. They celebrated holidays in ways that felt right for them, sometimes including friends as chosen family, other times embracing cozy solitude. Evan penned cards to the teachers and neighbors who had defended them, and Linda made a habit of gratitude, even for life's small mercies. Occasionally, Linda saw Brian during structured visitation exchanges or community events. The bitterness of their former relationship did not magically disappear, but the boundaries set by the court offered both structure and safety. Over time, exchanges with Brian became less fraught. Linda focused on respectful communication and refrained from revisiting old wounds, modeling for Evan the power of measured grace and self-respect. For Evan, this was invaluable, a demonstration that justice, while sometimes born of struggle, could nurture dignity and peace for everyone involved. Moving forward, instead of seeing herself as a victim of the Harris family's campaign, Linda reframed her narrative. She had not just survived, she had reclaimed her life. She took up volunteer work at Evan's school and eventually enrolled in an evening college course she'd deferred for years. With time, Linda's small apartment began to feel less like a fortress and more like a sanctuary. Pictures of Evan's school achievements and colorful artwork filled the walls, tangible proof of a future no longer tethered to the traumas of the past. Evan, too, blossomed. Freed from constant anxiety, he delved into friendships and hobbies, joining the soccer team, building elaborate forts from bedsheets, and confiding more openly in his mother. The scars from the custody battle did not disappear, but they faded beneath the layers of new, happier memories, the quiet victory. Linda's journey did not end with a dramatic resolution, but in the quiet perseverance that followed. Occasionally, doubts or fears resurfaced, but Linda met them with the wisdom she had earned. She was vigilant, yes, mindful of boundaries, of the possibility of conflict reemerging, but she wasn't ruled by those fears anymore. Instead, she leaned into hope and possibility. Justice for Linda and Evan was not only the absence of persecution, but the freedom to imagine, to plan, and to grow together. It was found in Evan's laughter as he biked down their block, in family movie nights, and in the gentle, mundane routines of life returned to normal. They planted seeds in the garden, watched them grow, and taught themselves that healing required patience and faith. Above all, Linda resolved that honesty and openness would anchor their home. She answered Evan's questions as best as she could, age appropriately and without bitterness. The past was acknowledged, but not allowed to define their future. Lessons in resilience. As months passed, Linda found meaning even in pain. She quietly began to support other single parents in her community, offering advice, a listening ear, and sometimes just a cup of coffee and a knowing smile. Her story became a thread in the fabric of their small town, a reminder that perseverance in the face of cruelty could lead to hard-won healing. Linda and Evan participated in charity events, volunteering at food drives, as if to affirm through action that loss could be transformed into generosity. For Linda, justice meant helping others find their own voices, arming them with the tools and confidence that had lifted her out of darkness. Evan flourished too. He became braver in his choices, no longer hesitant to try new things at school or speak up when he felt strongly about something. Linda watched this transformation with pride and humility. She recognized in her son the product of their shared resilience. Full circle, finding hope in stability. The story of Linda and Evan would rarely be told beyond their close circle. The world had not paused for their suffering, nor did it mark the day when justice was finally served. But in that small Texas town, the ripples spread wide. For every sleepless night, every moment of doubt, there was now a corresponding piece of hope. A neighbor who brought over soup to celebrate a report card, a new friend who invited Evan to a birthday party, or a quiet Sunday morning spent reading together under the big sycamore in the park. In the end, justice for Linda and Evan was not a single moment, but the steady reclamation of all the moments that came after. The everyday acts of love, kindness, and fierce determination that knit together the fabric of their new life. Linda looked toward the future not as something to fear, but as a story still unfolding. She made a silent vow each night as Evan drifted off to sleep. Whatever challenges came next, she would face them with courage, honesty, and the quiet conviction that had carried them through their longest days. Their journey proved that justice is sometimes a simple thing, the right to live, love, and hope without interference. And for Linda and Evan, that alone made every battle worth it. Nurturing new beginnings, planting seeds of hope. In the wake of a storm that had upended their world, Linda and Evan stood at the threshold of something both terrifying and exhilarating, the unknown future. The battle for justice was won, the wrongs exposed, and the threats that had once haunted their every step had finally faded into the background. But life did not pause to let them recover. Instead, it nudged them forward into the quiet work of healing, a delicate, hopeful task no court decree could accomplish for them. The first gentle mornings, every new day felt different now. There was no more checking the window for unwelcome faces or bracing oneself for hostile phone calls before breakfast. Linda woke to soft autumn light filtering through thin curtains, the early morning stillness carrying a kind of peace she had forgotten was possible. For Evan, the shift was even more profound. Years of overhearing tense adult conversations and catching glimpses of his mother's tears in secret were behind him. Now he awoke not to dread, but to the slow, sweet comfort of possibility. Those first mornings were fragile, a kind of quiet after chaos that made both mother and son step carefully, as if not to disturb the delicate balance they had just achieved. Linda would watch Evan pile cereal into a bowl, his small face thoughtful but more at ease. Sometimes, when he caught her gaze, he would smile, genuine, without a trace of old fear. She realized their first task was not to fill the silence, but to honor it, learning again how to simply exist in each other's company without urgency or anxiety, rebuilding their world, one habit at a time. Healing did not look like grand gestures or sudden declarations of happiness. Instead, it was marked by rituals, small, predictable acts that helped rebuild the ordinary magic of family life. Linda made pancakes on Sundays, just because Evan liked them. They walked to the corner store for milk and gum, talking about video games and the neighbor's dog, leaving the past unspoken in favor of sillier, lighter topics. Linda began journaling each evening, inspired by her own survival and determined to foster resilience in both herself and Evan. She found that writing about the day's small victories, making Evan laugh, helping him focus on his homework, or just sitting on the porch together, watching the sky, offered a thread of continuity. Together, they grew a calendar wall with stickers for every milestone. A week of no nightmares, a full day with nothing but smiles. The first time Evan invited a friend over since the court battle ended. Each marker wasn't just a celebration. It was a conscious act of making hope tangible. Linda learned that hope isn't an abstract ideal, but something grown slowly and stubbornly, nurtured by attention and patience. The calendar became their family's quiet testament to perseverance, a paper field where seeds of happiness took root again, redefining family. The conventional vision of family had never quite fit Linda's reality, and the custody battle only underscored the variety of ways support can appear. As they moved forward, Linda and Evan reimagined what family could mean. Holidays lost their sense of obligation and were reshaped into celebrations of choice. Thanksgiving included neighbors who had testified on Linda's behalf or brought over soup when she'd been too tired to cook. Christmas became less about presents and more about creating new traditions together, building forts, making paper snowflakes, and sharing the kinds of quiet, affectionate moments that had once seemed so rare. Linda also reached out to her own mother, mending old misunderstandings with honest conversations about what they both now valued most: safety, love, and the right to choose who earned a place in their lives. Community, too, took on a deeper meaning. The teachers, friends, and even the helpful grocery cashier, who had offered small encouragements during the darkest days, now felt like more than acquaintances. Linda increasingly volunteered at Evan's school, hoping to pay forward the kindness they had received and to strengthen the roots of the new life they were building. Evan, emboldened by a sense of security, began to thrive at school and in his friendships. Linda understood that forgiveness was a process, not a verdict. She saw Brian at scheduled exchanges with Evan, sometimes awkward, sometimes strained, but never hostile. Boundary lines were respected, and while a complete reconciliation was unlikely, there was a growing sense of truce, an implied agreement to hold Evan's welfare above old grievances. Linda modeled dignity and restraint, showing Evan that one could coexist with hurt while still choosing not to perpetuate it. Tending the garden of dreams, Linda's old ambitions, abandoned during the fight for survival, began to sprout again. She signed up for an evening class at the local college, encouraged by the sense of possibility that now colored her everyday life. As she studied at the kitchen table, Evan would sometimes sit across from her, scribbling comic book sketches or building elaborate Lego cities. Both mother and son side by side in their pursuits, modeled for each other the power of renewal. They started a backyard garden, planting seeds in the tilled earth, even though neither had much experience. It was Evan's idea, a response to a classroom project, and Linda embraced it as a fitting metaphor for the life they were nurturing together. Some seeds failed, others pushed through with unexpected vigor. Tending their little plot of green became a daily ritual, a way of believing in growth, even when the results weren't always immediate. The garden was a place of serene lessons. Sometimes the harvest was meager, and sometimes the tomatoes came in a riot of flavor. But Linda cherished the process more than the outcome. For Evan, those messy hands and dirty knees meant playfulness and patience. For Linda, they were a reminder that care, given consistently and with hope, could make anything bloom. She often thought to herself, maybe this is what healing actually looks like. Hands in the dirt, faith in tomorrow's green, and the slow, certain work of tending what matters. Facing new fears and letting them go, freedom from their ordeal, did not mean an absence of worry. Both Linda and Evan, each in their own way, carried traces of what had happened. Linda's vigilance lingered in her careful preparedness, her habit of double-checking door locks and keeping spare copies of important documents stowed safely away. Evan sometimes startled at loud voices or grew quiet when a classmate mentioned a happy two-parent household. But rather than deny these fears, Linda made space for them. They talked honestly at the breakfast table or during late-night walks about anxiety and trust. Linda gently coached Evan in naming his worries and encouraged him to share openly. At the same time, she reminded herself that the past no longer defined their present, and she worked to embody new lightness, more laughter, less guardedness, the assurance that it was okay to feel safe again. Linda adopted the mantra that real courage was not forgetting pain, but moving forward in its presence. She joined a support group for single parents and found a space where her story no longer marked her as an object of pity, but as a source of strength. Sharing her experiences, she met others halfway along their own journeys, offering the hard-won lessons she'd carried from the courtroom to the kitchen table. Evan, too, found new ground for confidence. He signed up for after-school soccer and, though nervous at first, gradually learned to trust in his own resilience. Linda saw him grow braver, offering to help new classmates at recess, inviting friends over for sleepovers, and standing up for what he believed was right. It was as if, freed from the constant undertone of danger, his sense of possibility expanded in every direction. Finding purpose in giving back. Having lived for so long in a defensive posture, Linda now found purpose in giving back. She began organizing small meetups for parents who felt isolated, just as she once had, and volunteered to mentor women navigating the first steps out of toxic relationships. Linda realized that her struggle, once a source of shame, was now her superpower. Her empathy provided comfort and courage for those just beginning their own battles. Evan sometimes joined his mother at local food drives or community events, always watching how she interacted, firm but warm, never shying from her past, but always looking forward. For Linda, these acts were not just repayment for past help, but evidence that the hardship they had endured had meaning beyond their own household. Every thank you, every new friend, added to their stockpile of hope, living each day as a quiet celebration. Their new life was not a fairy tale, but it was steadfastly real. There were still bills and bad days, but Linda found that she measured time less by what went wrong and more by the joys they claimed. Evenings were filled with shared meals and stories. Sometimes they painted together or watched old cartoons beneath a blanket fort on the living room floor. These moments, so ordinary, radiated a kind of victory. Linda and Evan would sometimes walk the long block near the school, discussing dreams for the future. Evan wondered aloud if he might be an inventor one day, or if they could visit the ocean before he turned 12. Linda, in turn, found herself dreaming again too, both for her son and herself. She wanted to finish her degree, maybe travel, certainly to pay forward every ounce of support she had been shown. Looking to the horizon, what Linda understood as the season shifted was this: planting seeds of hope isn't about erasing the past, but refusing to let it set the boundary for the future. Healing is hard, often invisible work. Sometimes it is one step forward, sometimes two back. But in the rhythm of ordinary living, morning pancakes, garden dirt, hand-in-hand walks, Linda and Evan slowly learned that contentment was made, not granted. The kindness of others, the hard-won clarity of her own strengths, and the simple, unwavering bond between mother and son, these became the tools for constructing a life that was new, if never untouched by scars. Their story, once marked by conflict and loss, transformed into one of agency, gratitude, and gentle persistence. Sometimes, Linda would pause as she tucked Evan into bed, feeling overwhelmed by a gratitude so fierce it sometimes brought tears to her eyes. She would whisper softly, "We're okay now. You're safe. We're home." And Evan, in his lopsided way, would nod or grin, wrapping skinny arms around her neck and holding on tight. That was the reality of true hope. Not loud optimism or forced cheer, but the quiet certainty that storms pass, and new things can, if stubbornly tended, grow in their wake.